On Christmas Day 1996, the first episode of the iconic Only Fools and Horses trilogy was watched by 21 million of us.
Harry died yesterday.
And when I hear those stories about how much the pleasure it's given a lot of people, it gives me a great reward.
And just as many viewers were there for the heartbreaking second part, 2 days later. Far from the madcap mayhem of heroes and villains, modern men saw tragedy strike as Cassandra and Rodney suffered a miscarriage.
I'm sorry, Rodney.
All great comedy has got to be realistic about tragedy. And what you're talking about is something which is beyond words. It's beyond ordinary feelings. What do you say? What can you say?
I remember John Sullivan talking about it, actually, and saying, don't know how this could go down in the sitcom world, but, you know, I wanted to do it. So I think it was quite important for him to, as usual, he liked stretching the boundaries a bit.
He knew that, well, the rest of us, all of us as actors, we could go much deeper than just being funny all the time.
And a record-breaking 24 million tuned in on the 29th of December 1996 for the finale, just hoping for a happy ending.
Rodney's life has just crashed to the floor, and episode 3 starts in that same condition.
What's happening?
Del's trying to think of a way to get Rodney at least to talk about it and to get both of them to talk about it.
Del Boy's deliberately contrived. He stopped the lift from working because he knows, I mean, despite all the bluster, there's an element of quite savvy psychology about Del Boy as well, certainly when it comes to Rodney.
We decided to play it a slightly different way than we would normally do. Nick and I both felt we didn't want to over-rehearse it because it was such an emotional scene, and we wanted to give it as much truth as we could.
We did a pre-record rather than in front of the audience. It was because it's such an emotional scene. I think Tony and Gareth and all that, everybody thought, let's give it some space and time and not have the pressure of the audience. And Nick and David were brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
They loved the scene, both of them. I think Nick and David played it for Nick as well. David wanted it and said, this is a great moment for Nick.
And I've never felt such in pain like that in all my life.
Nicholas Lyndhurst's ability, I've had tears watching it. Two men going through those emotions was something you hadn't seen a lot of on television. So you loved their vulnerability.
We lost our baby.
And they were allowed to show their emotions, which was quite groundbreaking.
You shield yourself from it, you know?
Rodney is grateful for being given the opportunity to confront his demons.
It made me cry, that scene, so many times. I've watched it so many times. And I just thought, everything about that show is about that scene, really.
You're continually reminded that there is this extraordinary bond between the two of them.
Come here. Wait. Come on.
And then a gear change, as every scene led us towards the Trotter's magic moment, as Raquel's antique dealer dad spotted treasure buried in Del's lockup, a fabled Harrison watch.
It has the name Harrison engraved in it. You can see there.
Harrison watches were for navigation. Captain Cook had one for taking around the world. He had H2. There was H1, H2, 4 and 5. Then the 6 never got made, but there were drawings of it. So that's why it got called the mythical watch, because nobody ever knew whether it got made or whether it didn't get made. So it was an important piece, but it looked very ordinary. It didn't look valuable.
So when they find this watch, they have to prove that it is theirs, and that's difficult for someone like Del Boy, who doesn't like to keep much of a paper trail.
Del was not one for keeping receipts. He was always fearful that the taxman or the police would find a bit of paperwork and would link him to something and he'd get into trouble.
But Rodney does.
Rodney, in the first episode, we see looking through a pile of receipts.
What are you doing now?
Our accounts.
You dozy little twonk, Rodney. This is prima facie evidence, isn't it, eh? The tax man gets hold of that, it puts away for 3 years.
Don't worry, if a tax man comes, I'll eat it.
It's those very receipts that they later find in the garage, in Time on Our Hands, that actually prove that the Trotters own that watch.
1 silver fob watch engraved Harrison.
Good boy, Rodders. What have I always told you? I've always said, always keep the receipts.
Everything was plotted so carefully. I don't know whether he had lots of things at home on his wall or whether it was just all in his brain, John Sullivan. He was so clever.
And the scene was set for Trotter's independent traders to pitch up at the creme de la creme of international auctioneers.
I think if you were going into Sotheby's and saying you were doing a show about, and a drama or whatever, about 2 South London crooks, you wouldn't get in the door. But once you say it's only Fools and Horses.
I'd like to start the bidding at £150,000.
And you just watch Del Boy do his feint. And can I just say, that's really hard to do those feints where they go straight back, because the crash mat can hurt. But he does the most fantastic, stiff as a board, straight back feint.
4, thank you. The bid stands at £4 million.
When I first started watching Only Fools and Horses, I so wanted them to be millionaires.
It's a brilliant storyline because, obviously, when the line was this time next year, Rodney will be millionaires, in fact, they had been millionaires all along. And it was there, and it was right under their noses, and they didn't realise.
You want to go first, or should I?
Well, why don't we go together?
Yeah, all right. 1, 2, 3.
In 1996, they got more than 24 million people watching Only Fools and Horses, which happens to be more than those people who watched the Euro semi-finals that same year between England and Germany.
It was a strange feeling of one of joy and one of sadness, really, because you thought, that's the end of Del Boy and Rodney.
I remember being in the studio and recording that last scene. I just remember saying to the floor manager in front of the audience, that's it, folks. That's the end of Fools and Horses. The whole place exploded. Thinking about it feels emotional now. The audience went potty.
We got a standing ovation in the studio of 7 minutes. And they wouldn't let us go.
In the studio on the final night, everybody was quite emotional. It was just a silly old wooden set in the studio, but this funny little world of the Trotters flat meant a lot to everybody.
Coming up.
This time next year, we're going to be millionaires.
This time last week, we were millionaires.
As Only Fools and Horses and this celebration comes to an end,
Chateau Neuf de
we find out which festive moment
I must get a plug put on this thing, Rodney.
would top Sir David's Christmas tree.
It really is difficult to choose between them, and there are so many.